"You little trump, you wonderful, lovely, square little brick," he breathed silently, and bent over to touch her cheek lightly with his lips. Slight as the caress was, it disturbed her, and even in her sleep her subconscious mind sent out an exploring hand to touch her Steve and thus be reassured. He pressed her hand, and she settled back comfortably, with a long, deep breath, and he stretched his iron-clad length beside her and closed his eyes, firmly resolved not to waste a minute of this wonderful night in sleep. When he opened them an instant later, it was broad daylight. The boulders had been rolled away. The fragrance of roasting meat permeated the atmosphere, and Nadia was making a deafening clamor, beating his steel breastplate lustily with the flat of his huge saber. "Daylight in the swamp, you sleeper!" she exclaimed. "Roll out or roll up! Come and get it before I throw it away!" "I must have been kind of tired," he said sheepishly, when he saw that she had shot a bird and had cooked breakfast for them both while he had been buried in oblivion. "Peculiar, too, isn't it?" Nadia asked pointedly. "You only did about 10 days' work yesterday in 10 minutes, swinging this frightful snickersnee of yours. Why, you played with it as though it were a knitting needle, and when I wanted to wake you up with it, I could hardly lift it." "Thought you didn't want that subject even mentioned." He tried to steer the talk away from his prowess with the broadsword. "That was yesterday," airily. "Besides, I don't mind talking about you. It's thinking about us being, you know, that I can't stand." Breakfast over, they started down the valley, Stevens carrying the helmet under his arm. Hardly had they started, however, than Nadia's keen eye saw movement through the trees, and she stopped and pointed. Stevens looked once, then, hand in hand, they dashed back to their cave. "We'll pile up some of the boulders and you lie low," he instructed her as he screwed on his helmet. She snapped open his faceplate. "But what about you? Aren't you coming in too?" she demanded. "Can't. They'd surround us and starve us out. I'm safe in this armor. Thank heaven we made it as solid as we did, and I'll fight 'em in the open. I'll show 'em what the bear did to the buckwheat." "All right, I guess. But I wish I had my armor too," she mourned as he snapped shut his plate and walled her into the cave with the same great rocks he had used the night before. Then, Nadia safe from attack, he drew his quiver of war arrows into position over his shoulder, placed one at the ready on his bowstring, and turned to face the horde of things rushing up the valley toward him. Wild animals he had supposed them, but as he stood firm and raised his weapon, shrill whistles sounded in the throng, and he gasped as he realized that those frightful creatures must be intelligent beings, for not only did they signal to each other, but he saw that they were armed with bows and arrows, spears and slings. 6-limbed creatures they were, of a purplish-red color, with huge, tricornigerous heads and with staring, green, phosphorescent eyes. 2 of the 6 limbs were always legs, 2 always arms. The intermediate 2, due to a midsection jointing of the 6-foot-long, almost cylindrical body, could be used at will as either legs or arms. Now, out of range as they supposed, they halted and gathered about one who was apparently their leader. Some standing erect and waving 4 hands while shaking their horns savagely in Stephen's direction, others trotting around on 4 legs, busily gathering stones of suitable size for their vicious slings. Too far away to use their own weapons, and facing only one small 4-limbed creature, they considered their game already in the bag, but they had no comprehension of earthly muscles, nor any understanding of the power and range of a 100-pound bow driving a steel-headed war arrow. Thus, while they were arguing, Stevens took the offensive, and a cruelly barbed steel warhead tore completely through the body of their leader and mortally wounded the creature next beyond him. Though surprised, they were not to be frightened off, but with wild, shrill screams rushed to the attack. Stevens had no ammunition to waste, and every time that mighty bow twanged, a yard-long arrow transfixed at least one of the red horde, and a body through which had torn one of those ghastly, hand-forged arrowheads was of very little use thereafter. Accurately sped arrows splintered harmlessly against the reinforced windows of his helmet and against the steel guards protecting his hands. He was almost deafened by the din as the stone missiles of the slingers rebounded from his reverberating shell of steel. But he fired carefully, steadily, and powerfully until his last arrow had been loosed. Then, the wicked dirk in his left hand and the long and heavy saber weaving a circular path of brilliance in the sun, he stepped forward a couple of paces to meet the attackers. For a few moments nothing could stand before that fiercely driven blade. Severed heads, limbs, and fragments of torsos literally filled the air. But sheer weight of numbers bore him down. As he fell, he saw the white shaft of one of Nadia's hunting arrows flash past his helmet and bury itself to the flock in the body of one of the horde above him. Nadia knew that her arrows could not harm her lover, and through a chink between two boulders she was shooting into the thickest of the mob, speeding her light arrows with the full power of her bow. Though down, the savages soon discovered that Stevens was not out. In such close quarters he could not use his sword, but the 14-inch blade of the dirk, needle-pointed as it was, with two razor-sharp serrated cutting edges, was itself no mean weapon, and time after time he drove it deep, taking life at every thrust. 4 more red monsters threw themselves upon the prostrate man, but not sufficiently versed in armor to seek out its joints. Their fierce short spear thrusts did no damage. Presently 4 more corpses lay still, and Stevens, with his, to them, incredible earthly strength, was once more upon his feet in spite of their utmost efforts to pinion his mighty limbs, and was again swinging his devastating weapon. Half their force lying upon the field, wiped out by a small but invincible and apparently invulnerable being, the remainder broke and ran, pursued by Stevens to the point where the red monsters had first halted. He recovered his arrows and returned to the cave, opening his faceplate as he came. "All X, sweetheart?" he asked, rolling away the boulders. "Didn't get anything through to you, did they?" "No, they didn't even realize that I was taking part in the battle, I guess. Did they hurt you while you were down? I was scared to death for a minute." "No, the old armor held. One of them must have gnawed on my ankle some, between the greave and the heel plate, but he couldn't quite get through. It's a darn small opening there, too. Must have bent my foot way round to get in at all. Have to tighten that joint up a little, I guess. I'll bet I've got a black spot and a blue spot there the size of my hand. Maybe it's only the size of yours, though. You won't die of that, probably. Heavens, Steve, that cleaver of yours is a frightful thing in action. Suppose it's safe for us to go home?" "Absolutely. Right now is the best chance we'll ever have, and something tells me that we'd better make it snappy. They'll be back, and the next time they won't be so easy to take." "All X, then. Hold me, Steve. I can't stand the sight of that, let alone wade through it. I'm going to faint or something, sure." "As you were," he snapped. "You aren't going to pass out now that it's all over. It's a pretty ghastly mess, I know, but shut your eyes, and I'll carry you out of sight." "Aren't we out of sight of that place yet?" she demanded after a time. "I have been for quite a while," he confessed, "but you're sitting pretty, aren't you? And you aren't very heavy, not here on Ganymede, anyway." "Put me down," she commanded. "After that crack, I won't play with you any more at all. I'll pick up my marbles and go home." He released her, and they hurried back toward their waterfall, keeping wary eyes sharp, set for danger in any form, animal or vegetable. On the way back across the foothills, Stephen shot another hexaped, and upon the plateau above the river Nadia bagged several birds and small animals. But it was not until they were actually in their own little canyon that their rapid pace slackened and their vigilance relaxed. "After this, Ace, we hunt together, and we go back to wearing armor while we're hunting. It scared me out of a year's growth when you checked up missing." We sure